So it is 5:30 according to my computer, and we do indeed have quorum. So we'll begin the special planning meeting for this, which is an educational information session. So I call this meeting to order. I'm looking for an approval of the agenda. Thank you very much, Councillor Hutchison and Councillor Hill. And we did receive electronically minutes. Oh, I'll call the question. Did I call the question? All those in favor of the agenda? Carried. Yeah. Okay. There are no confirmation of minutes will follow with our regular meeting. Disclosure of pecuniary interest. Seeing none. Delegations. We have no delegations. We do indeed have a briefing. Ms. McCormick, Deputy Director, Planning, Building and Licensing, will provide a briefing regarding land use planning orientation for the Planning Committee. And I believe that we all should have received now this wonderful handout.
Sorry, James.
And you can go home and study it, and there'll be a test next week. No. Thank you.
You guys good? Oops. So good evening. I am joined this evening by a couple of my colleagues. We manage the planning department for the City of Kingston. I know most of you. I'm Paige Agnew, Director of Planning, Building and Licensing for the city. I also am joined by Mr. Greg, Manager of Policy, and Laura McCormick, who is our Deputy Director, and she is currently overseeing the development approvals part of the planning department. So we're here tonight to talk to you about planning generally, some of the work that we have ongoing, and certainly to take any questions from you whenever they arise. I just wanted to give, for the new members of council, a sense of what we do in planning, building, and licensing services. And the reason why that's relevant is oftentimes there are things that come up as part of the land use planning process that go beyond that. So it may be something to do with a business license that is tied to the planning application. It could be what the building permit process is related to the planning application. So I just wanted this group to have an understanding that within planning, building, licensing services, we do manage those other elements, and we do so in an integrated fashion. So all of the staff that work in planning, building, and licensing, I have a management team of, I believe, 9 individuals. We all work together as a team, and these are the people who work with most directly related to applications, but we're a full service group when it comes to building and licensing matters as well. From the planning perspective, we do long-range policy planning, so Greg's going to talk to you about that tonight. That's under his portfolio. Development approvals, again, that's what Laura's overseeing for the group. Zoning bylaw administration, heritage planning and approvals, and Greg currently oversees that, part of our operation. Civic addressing and street naming, tree bylaw administration, renewable energy applications, and then other things as required as they come up. Again, just for a sense, and we provided you with a hard copy of this, I wanted you to see the structure of the department. Again, you'll get to know a number of the planners that are on staff, and I encourage you to develop relationships with those planners, to approach them on their files, to seek out specific information. So those are the team members that work underneath each of the managers. Again, we are a cross-functional department, so it's not uncommon for someone that may be listed under Greg under policy planning to also be doing a development approval application and vice versa. We do that for the purpose of cross-training our staff and to make sure that people thoroughly understand planning policy, that are seeing planning applications and applying them, and the reverse of that as well. We also have Secrete. Some of you may know her already. She's a project manager in our group. She's Dale work, for example, so she's a person that you'll get to see and become familiar with as well, and a great resource for the department. We have the GIS department as well, with all of our mapping and geographical information systems, and the team that oversees DASH, which is our land management system. So there's a lot of different functions within the department. We are quite a large group. So in terms of planning, we're going to be talking to you tonight about essentially what planning is, and it's really the way that we manage our land and our resources as a community. And what we really want to focus on is an integrated approach to planning. So it's one, again, building on the city's commitment to public engagement and the framework that was established last year, looking at where we can engage the public in key planning discussions, seeking their feedback and how that information is integrated into the recommendations that come to you for final decisions. We really try to make data-driven decisions, and that's something that the city is really trying to get up to speed on. It may not have always been as we are now, but that is something certainly that we're focused on, and we'll talk to you about that. We think about the overall strategic priorities of the community at all times when we're reviewing planning applications and seek to make sure that what we're trying to do furthers the city's overall priorities as a whole, as it's applicable. We look to leverage policy and technology. Certainly a key element of what we do is understanding demographics and looking at the demographics of not only Canada and Ontario, but specifically Eastern Ontario, the challenges that we face as a declining demographic. We also look at supporting the city from a financial stability perspective, and that's a really key relationship understanding to have as being a member of this committee. Certainly when we look at creating new planning permissions that translate into new buildings translate into additional taxable revenue for the city, which helps to balance the overall budget. So there's a very important relationship between land use planning and financial sustainability for the community, and we'll talk to you a little bit more about that. And certainly we are trying to embrace creativity and innovation, not only in our planning practice of how we communicate with the public, the way that we talk about planning, but certainly in the way that we try to embrace new technology and design related to the community as well. So for this evening, Laura and Greg are going to take from here. They're going to talk to you about the respective areas that they oversee. Laura's going to speak to you about the development applications process and some of the key information, both legislatively and from a process perspective, that it's good for you to get a good handle on. And certainly, planning is very litigious. It's very detail-oriented. There's a lot of legislation, and we don't expect you to be up to speed on that in one night. So we're always available for questions, and there's no bad questions when it comes to planning. So please feel free to ask us anything, anytime. She'll talk to you about the development review process, how we give notice, how we engage people in that process, and also we'll talk to you about the land management system. And that's a really key piece of technology that we use to manage applications. As members of planning committee, you'll receive, and I know some of you have already been receiving technical circulations. That's how you know in advance the types of applications that are in process, the things that are being contemplated. It's a way for your constituents also to stay on top of what's happening in planning matters. Everything is linked to our geographical information, so people can search for applications all over the city, see what status they're in, and they can retrieve any information they want on a planning application. It's all done digitally so that we're not printing large volumes of paper the way historically been done. We do everything now digitally. On the planning side, talk to you about some of our key planning policy documents that we use to help guide our land use decisions as a community and ongoing policy projects. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Laura McCormick, and I'm going to sit back down, but I'm happy to answer any questions at any point.
Just one very quick question. I noticed on your org chart, and thank you very much, I would have really appreciated it, having a good org chart like this when I first came on planning. I noticed there are 2 vacancies, one an intermediate planner and one manager development appraisals. When do you anticipate those positions being backfilled? Because I know the challenge to your department is an awful lot of a pretty heavy workload. So when do you anticipate hirings might take place?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have been doing active recruitment actually for several months. We have 2 intermediate planner positions, one that's a maternity leave that we're trying to backfill for. We also have an intermediate planner that we're in the recruitment process for right now, and the manager development approvals, that job is currently posted and should be closing sometime this month. I'm just going through and seeing what type of applications point, but obviously they're very critical positions that we're actively recruiting for right now.
Great. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. So I'm obviously here to talk about specifically the development application review process. So really the role of planning committee in that development application review process, I think, is the fundamental piece about what we're talking about tonight. So obviously we hold statutory public meetings under the Planning Act. We consider you consider advice from staff and public input, make recommendations to council based on the legislative requirements for applications under the Planning Act, really plans to subdivision, the final condo that we had recently, applications for official plan amendments and zoning bylaw amendments. You also have decision-making authority if a site plan application gets bumped up to planning committee. You don't have to give advice to council in that regard. You also make recommendations to council on major planning policy. Greg will speak with you about tonight, so updates to the city's official plan, any types of new secondary plans, amendments from a citywide basis in the official plan, new citywide zoning bylaw, that type of thing.
So bumped up just means it bypasses committee, goes right to council?
So this applications for site plan are actually delegated to staff for approval. So if council has the office of planning committee, council have the opportunity to bump up an application, which essentially says we don't want staff to delegate their approval on this particular matter. Can you bring a report to planning committee so make the final decision on whether something should be approved or not?
Okay, thanks.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, how would I know if I would bump up something? Like, I'll give you an example. Before I successfully elected council, there was an issue out in Westbrook.
Oh, sorry. In Westbrook, it's a smaller, where they have a subdivision that's now being put alongside that pipeline. It was originally supposed to be a seniors center, and then people bought homes in Kananaskis Drive, thinking it was going to be a senior center. Changed to a residential system, but once the planning was all approved for the seniors home, there was no requirement for the builder or the proponent to go back to the citizens and say, hey, no, we've put an application in and we've changed our purpose. So
That's as much a political question as it is a planning question. So I'll give you a quick response, and I'm sure you can add to it.
How do I know if to bump it up if I don't know about it?
Bump up
To
even with the delegated authority, all that it needed originally was one councillor to say, I want that to come up back to plan it. But instead of that, we came up with a policy that it needed to be a decision of council. So usually it's a district councillor. You get a seconder. There's usually very little debate, and we are a collegial group, and so I can't remember, Rob can correct me if I'm wrong, but I can't remember a request for a bump up ever being refused at council. So what that means is that once it passes at council, staff will be working on site plan concurrently when they're working on the whole file. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it kind of goes into abeyance at that time, and they come back for discussion and approval here. And often this body makes a recommendation to council to alter something about the site plan proposal. Not always, but sometimes. Is that fairly accurate?
So I just want to clarify, the site plan approval process is separate from an application for a zoning bylaw amendment. So the site bylaw amendment, we actually deal with the land use and the setbacks and the building. Through site plan, you deal with functional needs and the materials on a building. So if there was a fundamental issue from a land use perspective, site plan wouldn't be the time to have the conversation about whether something is permitted or not. That's at the zoning stage. So if something's already permitted by the zoning bylaw and they're going through site plan, we would be talking about a much more detailed level of conversation about what do the windows look like? What's the materials? Where are the parking spaces? What's the landscaped open space look like? Where are the trees being planted on the property? And really those design details. So that's why it's a delegated authority to staff, because it's really those design conversations that are happening from a technical perspective, whereas the land uses are dealt with through the zoning bylaw. So if it's something that's already permitted, even if there's concerns about the land uses, it's not something to regulate through site plan.
Often things get bumped up, and it's an effort, I think, often to give the public an opportunity to see that it's a public decision-making process. When with delegated authority, and if it isn't bumped up, it just happens with staff without much community input or concerns expressed. So bump ups give the public an opportunity to watch the process evolve. So
if you have questions about a particular application and concerns that you have on it, staff are certainly happy to answer any kind of questions about what the appropriate way to deal with the public's concerns are. So we're happy to talk about those on a specific basis.
Thank you very much, all.
Just a quick comment. If questions is great, they need to be asked. We have 1 hour. If we aren't completed this at that time, we will recess, and when we complete our regular agenda, we'll come back to this. But you may wish to save your questions unless it's really, really a compelling question. You always ask compelling questions. I'll recognize you. Go ahead.
Thank you. And Councillor Chappelle, does everything always eventually get site plan? Because I think there's a few cases where I thought something would come for site plan and I'd be able to bump it up or like see the site plan, have more detail, and then it worked out, oh no, it doesn't, because it's this type of application, it doesn't. So can you just describe that, and then I'll take notes so I won't have to be surprised next time.
Certainly, through you, Mr. Chair, we have a bylaw that essentially regulates the types of development that need to go through our site plan control process. So they have to make applications. So residential units or residential uses when there are 4 or more dwelling units. So if there are 3 or less, they're exempt from site plan and they don't need to apply for a site plan application. There are non-residential buildings when they're over 300 square meters in area. Any type of residential or non-residential development if they're on an arterial or collector road. And then I think there's a list of 20 items in our site plan bylaw. When you're adding 3 or more portables to a school, like there's a very detailed list. Properties that are within the Berryfield Heritage Conservation District. So it's a very particular list. The first 3 that I listed are the site plan applications that we see. So 4 or more residential units, non-residential that's over 3 meters in area, and any type of development that's on an arterial or collector road. So going on with the presentation.
Mr. Chair, if I may add as well, just for members of the committee, if there is an application that's coming through Planning Committee that you have some concerns about because we're dealing with land use at a zoning level, so it's a higher level, you don't see all the details of what the site is going to look like. And if you're interested in bringing it to Planning Committee as far as the bump up for the site plan, we're happy to work with you if you flag it for us. And I know we've done that with a number of councillors that have been here for some time, where we will work together and help you even craft a motion so you can bring that to council.
Thank you. The floor is yours again.
Okay. So the decision-making context, and it's really established by the province. Municipalities have the right to plan because the province allows us to plan. So essentially, the Planning Act is what the main body of legislation is that we as planners really need to know inside and out and follow. Underneath, it's a much more broad provincial level document. So as we kind of move down this triangle, it gets more specific. So the top 2, Planning Act and the Provincial Policy Statement, are general documents that are issued by the province. We get into the official plan and zoning bylaws, and they're obviously City of Kingston specific, so they're much more detailed. So Greg will actually go through and explain what the documents are. I wanted to give a high-level overview of what the Planning Act is, because it really establishes the rules that we must follow when we're reviewing development applications. It establishes the requirements for our statutory public meetings. It establishes all of our notice requirements that we need to follow on any given application. It establishes the timelines that we must follow from making a decision on an application before an applicant has the opportunity to appeal a non-decision of an application. It's really what tells us what we need to do as the rules. The key rules that I think for today that you should be very aware of is that Council and Planning Committee shall have regard to matters of provincial interest. So essentially, the Planning Act sets out what it considers to be provincial interest. It states that a decision of Council or a planning board that affects a planning matter shall be consistent with the provincial policy statement. So the provincial policy statement is what I'll get into next, but you'll see in all of our reports that we provide to you, if we're providing a comprehensive report with a recommendation, we go through these rules because it's something that we must follow as professional planners to give you advice about whether we think something is consistent with the provincial policy statement. It also states that all bylaws that passes shall conform with the official plan. So when we're reviewing an application for a zoning bylaw amendment, we review it against the policies of the official plan to ensure that the amendment still conforms with the policies of the official plan. So you'll see this language a lot in our comprehensive reports when we're making recommendations, because these are the tests that are really important that are established by the Planning Act. Provincial policy statement is it's a policy document that applies across the province. There are a number of other provincial plans like the Greenbelt Plan, the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe that don't apply here. So in Kingston, the provincial plan that we need to worry about is the provincial policy statement. So it is a high-level policy document that establishes goals and objectives that we shall be consistent with. So our official plan, a way that is consistent with the provincial policy statement. So the provincial policy statement is really about building strong and healthy communities, the management and wise use of resources, and protecting public health and safety. So there are a number of policies about land use settlements and employment and housing, about the strong communities. So obviously speaks to protecting cultural heritage resources and natural heritage features and water, agricultural lands. So the provincial policy statement is really the high-level policies that have informed what our official plan says. When we receive an application for a zoning bylaw amendment or official plan, we have a mandatory pre-application process. So the submitted through DASH, which I'll speak to in a couple of minutes. The applicant comes in, meets with city staff. We have a whole technical review. All of our technical reviewers provide some initial feedback. So that happens before they even submit a Planning Act application. It's a confidential process, so it's not information that's shared publicly until an actual complete application is submitted under the Planning Act. We'll circulate the application to all of our technical reviewers. We'll get the technical feedback. We'll hold a public meeting at Planning Committee, which is a statutory meeting that is stated in the Planning Act that we must hold. Following the meeting, there might be some back and forth with the developer about changes that need to happen. So it's a very iterative process after the initial statutory public meeting, where some developers or landowners or applicants make revisions very quickly to address any concerns, and we very quickly are supportive of a proposal, whereas sometimes it takes multiple months and circulations and discussions between the applicant and the city, and we might have to come back for a second public meeting depending on the nature of the revisions. So the piece between the statutory public meeting and the comprehensive report at Planning Committee, the timing on that component of the development review process is what varies the most from file to file. Obviously, once staff are satisfied with the application, we'll make a recommendation to Planning Committee that reviews all of the policies that we must review to satisfy the Planning Act tests, and make our recommendation to Planning Committee for your consideration. You make your recommendation to Council about whether an application should be approved or denied. Council makes a decision on the Planning Act applications, and then following that decision, there's there's a notice of decision, and there's an appeal period during which time someone can appeal a file to the local planning appeal tribunal. So you'll see, obviously, this is a pretty high-level overview of a very detailed process. Down the left-hand side of the page in front of you, we do identify what notices happen. So we have to send out notices of complete application, notice of public meeting, the notice of the regular meeting where the comprehensive considered, and then the notice of the passing or refusal. At any point in time, the public is able to provide written comments before Council makes a decision on an application. So we provide notices, obviously, the receipt of a complete application and public meetings. Those notices look like a mail out, so there's statutory notice requirements that we have to include on our public meeting notices. So they go out to a 120-meter radius of the subject property. It's also an email or a mail to all of the prescribed bodies. So the province essentially tells us you have to send it to these school boards and these railway lines and these conservation authorities. So they also receive notice of our applications. And then we also have the signs that are posted on the site. So each street frontage, you'll see, obviously we have development signs. So that's the way that you fulfill the statutory requirements of the notice. We also, Planning Department, we publish a courtesy notice in the Kingston WIG, which is not a requirement of the Planning Act, but it's published before our public meetings at Planning Committee. And then the notice of decision on a file is mailed to those who have made any type of representation committee, requested notice, or submitted written comments. So obviously at Planning Committee, I think you've had one Planning Committee meeting with the new members here. The public has the ability to provide a 5-minute presentation at Planning Committee during the first public meeting or at the time that the comprehensive report is considered, and then at any point in time the public can submit written comments. As Peach had mentioned earlier, the DASH, which stands for Development and Services Hub, is our online application system in the planning division. So any of our application types, all of the applications are submitted electronically by the applicants. They obviously go to this website, you can submit your application, and the public also has the ability to see all of the information about active planning applications. So even if you just wanted to go in and take a look at what's happening on a file, it'll tell you what status in that development review process where we're at, and you can actually see all of the plans and reports that have been submitted in support of the application.
Okay, that was quick. Through you, Mr. Chair, how much time do we have? I need about 10 minutes. Okay. Okay. I won't rush them. My name is Greg Newman, the Manager of Policy Planning. I think I've met everyone here before. So at a high level, a lot of what our does is prepare updates and comprehensive review of the official plan, and I'll get into in a minute what the official plan is, as well as implementing mechanisms to the official plan, so things like zoning bylaws, community improvement plans, site plan control bylaws, and so on. We also prepare secondary specific plans. We have a number of these ongoing right now. These are very detail-oriented projects that right now in Kingston encompass a lot of land. We undertake amendments to the official plan and other implementing documents to ensure compliance with applicable law. I think a good example of one that we did recently was we amended our zoning bylaws for parking standards for barrier-free. So there are changes to the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. And so we had to amend our zoning standards for barrier-free parking supply. Right now, we're taking long-range forecasts for population, housing, and employment, and I know a number of you have been engaged in that work. And then we prepare guidelines to help staff in managing client expectations, but also to help inform decision-making and the recommendations that we provide to council through this committee. So what's an official plan? Because an official plan, I would say, if you're not familiar with it, it's a very important document for this committee to be familiar with. It's essentially the blueprint for growth in the city. It establishes the goals, objectives, and policies to manage and direct physical change over the long term, so essentially a 20-year horizon. The OP, or the official plan, is informed by us. The forecasts that we're undertaking right now are fundamental not just to the official plan, but to a lot of the projects and a lot of the longer range policy documents that the city is undertaking. The official plan identifies land needs, and I'll get into that in a minute here. And then, as Laura mentioned, we have a provincial policy obligation to make sure that we're protecting scarce resources, and the official plan is a document that helps us do that. It reflects community aspirations, so the results of the last 5-year update, which was approved by council in 2017, was 100+ amendments to the official plan. And that's largely a reflection of a great deal of public input and change to reflect their aspirations as they relate to social, economic, and environmental factors. The plan ultimately speaks to where we want to grow and what we want growth to look like. And Schedule 2 to the official plan I've got on the screen here. This is a fairly, I would say, fundamental schedule to the official plan. What you can see in this plan is you can see the red line, which represents the city's urban growth boundary. So the lands within that are the lands within which we have servicing capacity, or at least services, to support growth. And outside of that is our rural areas within which the province directs us to limit growth and development. This is the land use plan, or the land use schedule to the official plan. There are actually 3. And so this is the one that I think you'll see most often around the horseshoe here. You identify in the colors there the land use designations, residential, business park, and so on. And that obviously helps to inform the types of uses that are permitted. And as Laura mentioned, you then migrate in specific details of permissions outlined in the implementing zoning bylaw. I mentioned we're also doing a number of secondary plans and area-specific plans. So these are geographically limited land use plans that are often undertaken to address a challenge or an opportunity. So right now we have through Williamsville, Cat West, Cat North, and Rideau community. And we're currently undertaking secondary plans for Central Kingston, North Kingstown, and Redendale. We're also starting up a plan for Clogs Road, which is intended to support more business-oriented development over the long term. And these secondary plans, both existing and projects underway, are reflected in Schedule 13 to the official plan. This is a schedule that coincides with the Williamsville Main Street plans. So we have, ultimately what happens is we have a great deal of community input. We look at what the community's aspirations are in these very specific areas. Aspirations translate into very specific land use planning policies. Those policies are then incorporated into the official plan and are used to help inform recommendations provided to council.
Through the chair. Just, I wouldn't say I read the official plan, but I sort of have skimmed through it. And, you know, because we've heard a lot about building size, height. And I noticed that in the secondary plans, there was quite often a reference to building height. In general, I didn't see that. Is that because, so, like, for example, I know the Kingston Central is, I'm assuming you're developing a secondary plan for Kingston Central, is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
So would that include building height recommendations then as well?
It may do, and if it did, it would probably be very limited to a very specific geographic area within the secondary planned area. I think if we start to get into the habit of incorporating quantified parameters in the official plan, we start to duplicate some of the control mechanisms that we have as a municipality. I'm a believer in having clarity of the intention of policies in the policy documents and then implementing controls in the regulatory documents like a zoning bylaw. So what we should be doing, in my view, is saying, for example, in Williamsville that we want to regulate the amount of solar exposure on the ground, so we're going to implement an angular plane through the regulatory controls of the zoning bylaw. So the OP, the official plan, would set out the policy intent to protect solar exposure on the ground, and that objective or that intent is implemented through a regulatory control in the zoning. There's nothing that precludes us from putting more specific regulatory controls in the official plan. It just becomes a very difficult document then to enable some room for interpretation when things start to be looked at in a more detailed level on the ground.
Just to follow up, if I may. So at this point then in the central Kingston, there's no specific requirement for buildings to be a certain height.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. I don't believe at this point we've got introducing specific quantified standards in the policies that we're contemplating. Yeah. This is just another example of a land use plan that's specific to Cat North. So in this particular plan into another layer of detail, and that's sort of common in our secondary plans, is you're being more explicit with the types of uses that you are contemplating in very specific areas. So what you can anticipate, I believe, with the North Kingstown plan, for example, are new land use designations that are going to be very specifically applied to areas within that plan. So new permissions for land use in very limited areas of that plan as a result of community aspirations.
Mr. Chair.
Councillor Chappelle.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Newman, I'm actually delighted if you go back to that slide that you put up Cataraqui North as an example. And I'd like to take notice of the very dark sort of maroon color. This is neighborhood commercial on the sort of the crazy hoop there. That particular location is no longer commercial, but is actually a condominium. And the public looks at the plan and was expecting along Crossfield Avenue, we're expecting to see a commercial property, and then it became a condominium 3 stories tall. So how does that happen?
Through you, Mr. Chair, in this particular case, what I suspect happened is that the neighborhood commercial designation that was introduced is an enabling designation, so it allows for a commercial use to be established, but it doesn't preclude a residential use from also being established. That's what I suspect the land use framework allows in this context. It's more enabling in its structure.
So is that something council should look at to avoid that type of situation? Is there something that we could do as council put forward that if it's designated commercial, then it stays commercial unless it comes back to council and gets, and rather than being delegated to staff? Because it did create some anxiety in that neighborhood.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. These things are actually implemented is we would, at the end of doing a secondary plan, we would introduce through this committee an official plan amendment. And the official plan amendment would have a corresponding land use schedule like this, that then members of this committee have the opportunity to say whether or not you're supportive of potentially some of the limitations that are applied to land or some of the permissions that are also applied.
Thank you.
So as Laura mentioned, zoning bylaws are used to implement the policies to the official plan. To Mr. Hill's comments, the zoning bylaw gets into more specific quantified standards that are largely designed to support the intentions of the policies of the official plan. They're specific to regulating the use of land, and this is important. I think you'll hear this around the horseshoe over the course of your term, that you cannot use zoning to regulate the users of land. You can only regulate the use of land, as well as the height, bulk, location, size, floor area, and so on of buildings and structures. You can also regulate minimum frontage and depth of the parcel of land, so the way that a parcel is shaped, the elevation of doors, windows, and openings, and loading and parking facilities. You can also use zoning to say where certain types of development are, for example, in natural hazards like floodplains, as well as natural areas like provincially significant wetlands. So right now we have largely 5 municipal zoning bylaws that reflect pre-amalgamation conditions, and we're in the process right now of preparing a new single citywide zoning bylaw. Started in 2015, we released a draft in October of 2016. Since that time, we've been working on a number of quote-unquote bucket issues, so larger recurring issues or themes that have been presented by members of the public. An example being residential density, so the method with which we measure and regulate density. Right now, we measure it as units per net hectare, but we're looking at whether or not there are alternative ways of measuring density, like units or bedrooms per net hectare, for example, or floor space index, which is the amount of floor space you get per area of land. The second draft, we're contemplating a release in the fall of this year. We're wanting to make sure that we get the Central Kingston growth study done, because zoning bylaw to be reflective of the results of the work. That study alone is consuming about 1/3 of the urban core of the city geographically, so it's quite important that we have that captured in the new zoning bylaw.
Very quick question, if I can. Is it true that the zoning bylaw in 2020, when council approves the new comprehensive zoning, it will be appealed LPAT, but it won't rely on a provincial, like the official plan needs provincial approval, but this wouldn't, would it?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. This is not, the zoning bylaw is not approved by the ministry. So it's approved by the municipality. One of the pieces that was missing, a fairly substantial piece that was missing in the first draft of the bylaw, are proposed new parking standards. I think around the Horseshoe, you're again going to see a lot of applications that seek relief from the city's parking standards. That's in part because some of the parking standards that we have in our bylaws are 40+ years old. So Laura has undertaken a very comprehensive review of other municipal parking standards, and our consultant team at Dillon is looking at sort of further vetting that work. So the next iteration of the release to the public will have a very comprehensive parking standard section. So outside of the official plan and zoning bylaw, our department's working on a lot of other sizable planning projects. So I mentioned the secondary plans and area specific in the new citywide zoning bylaw. I mentioned the population, housing, and employment projections or forecasts that are underway. We're also doing a life cycle analysis. The intent of that is to look at what form of development provides the best level of cost recovery to the municipality. What sort of density should we be looking at of development, say of residential development, to allow us, to see better cost recovery. So we're running down the roads, we're having to replace light bulbs in the municipal road allowance. What sort of residential taxes do we need to receive to make that a more financially viable situation? We are working on zoning standards to provide options for second residential units, so our secondary suites. So we're actually hoping to bring this work to committee in the next couple of months so that this work can be implemented and we can start to see more units brought to market in Kingston. We know we have a very constrained market right now. We also have a fairly healthy list of people who are interested in seeing this work move forward. We are soon also committee design guidelines for the Highway 15 work that we undertook at the request of council to look at ways of improving the aesthetic along Highway 15. We're looking at rural estate residential policies. There were a couple of contentious official or hearings that occurred a number of years ago, and it led us to want to reevaluate how we're considering rural estate lot developments in the rural area. And we're looking at, through this work, potentially establishing greater constraint to doing rural estate lot subdivisions. Working on community benefit guidelines, which are guidelines to help us in the negotiation of benefits or community benefits when an additional height or density beyond what's allowed in the zoning. And we're preparing tall building guidelines as well, in part to support some of the community benefit guidelines work that we're doing. Beyond that work, which is work we have on the go right now, this is work that tends to happen on generally 5-year cycles. We do commercial lands review, employment lands review, to see what our vacancy rates are, for example, in commercial, how much employment lands we have left to accommodate the demand. We do a natural heritage study, or we're in need of doing a natural heritage study to see, for example, if the boundaries of PSWs have changed. An archaeological master plan update. The centers and corridors study is, I think, work. We're actually doing pieces of context of our secondary plans. So, for example, the Central Kingston work, one of the objectives of that is to recommend to council very specific areas to direct development and very specific areas where we ought not to direct development. The centers and the corridors that may come out of that will help to inform this broader citywide centers and corridor study that we do later on. I think fundamental and potentially contentious projects that we'll be doing within your term is the urban growth, urban boundary strategy update. So we're going to have housing employment projections. Stemming from that will have to be a land needs analysis to help us determine whether or not we need to the province about expanding our urban growth boundary, because you can only do that 5-year update to the official plan. And I suspect that you're going to start to receive pressure from the community at large to enter into that conversation.
Yeah, of the items on the list for policy work, how many come through provincial mandates versus municipal ones?
Not many. Plan update is one that's required. The secondary units work is actually one that the province is encouraging us to pursue, I guess, somewhat aggressively. It's the result of changes to the Planning Act that required that municipalities provide broader permissions for second units. But outside of that, we're not necessarily mandated by the province to undertake this work.
Although I believe that part of the policy, provincial policy statement talks about intentions, so that will have to be a consideration when we look at the urban growth boundary, because that usually translates into suburban, less dense development.
That's right, and through you, Mr. Chair, a lot of the work that we're doing is intended to help us make better decisions when we start to have to sort of evaluate that question of how does the city of Kingston want to grow? Do we want to grow inwards or outwards, and what's the best growing outwards if we do have to grow outwards? So if we do have to expand the urban boundary, maybe we're supporting a different type of residential development than we've supported in the past. So that's part of the intent of that life cycle analysis work that we're doing. So outside of that, as much as I'm sure it's very fresh in mind, the transportation master plan is something that we probably will also want to circle back on in the next, and then another update to the official plan. We're still not through the appeals on this one, but we'll get there.
Through you, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I'm looking at some of the sort of federal and provincial precincts that are inside the territory of the city of Kingston. So, like, for example, entry lands around Collins Bay. So, for example, it would defer, I would assume, sort of a need to expand our boundaries if we were able to assume some of that property, right? Is that ever, is that sort of and completely at the whim of the federal or provincial governments?
It's not out of the way, but we do consider it when we look at urban growth. For example, the Collins Bay Penitentiary lands. I think when we looked at that last, it had about a 12-year supply of housing if it ever came to private ownership, sort of municipal level ownership. So we do look at it, but we have to do it with a caveat to say you have to continue to plan the community and continue to satisfy provincial land supply requirements as if that's not available.
You're welcome. Yes, Councillor Chappelle.
Yes, thank you. Through you. Just leading on what Councillor Hill had mentioned, because I'm living up in the West End, I really hadn't thought much about the Kingston Penitentiary lands, but is there a report or proposal or something that's supposed to be happening with that property? And if not, or if so, who do I track down to find out the status of that plan for that area?
So through you, Mr. Chair, I'm sure Berto would like to speak to this one.
Thank you, and through you, I'm assuming you're referring to the Kingston Penitentiary, the former prison site. So there was a visioning process that took place a couple of years ago, give or take, that involved the community, but was really driven by Canada Lands. The city was a partner in this, but from Correction Services as well as Canada Lands was to look at how they could maximize the potential revenue for the property. So you probably recall, I'm sure you've seen it in the news and so on, that it was there was a proposal for a lot of residential development on the site. From a city perspective, we definitely indicated that we thought tourism was critical on this particular site. We have been operating public tours on the site now for a few years, and we have been making over $1 million in profit every year, 2017 being the highest, around $2.4 million in net profit. So we recognize it as a tourism asset, as well as I can tell you the tourism industry has flagged this as one of their priorities to maintain access to Kingston Pen for tourism purpose. So we are currently working with Correction Services. I actually have a meeting with them next week to talk about a multi-year agreement for access to be able to use a property not just for public tours, but for events, for film, and use it year-round as well, and really unlock the potential that we haven't been able to unlock so far with the tours we've been providing. As far as longer term than that, I know the intent of Correction is still to dispose eventually of the property, but there are definitely going to be some challenges in terms of even the planning process, because they would have to come back here at some point and get official plan amendment and get zoning in place, and it would involve a lot of work around heritage, as I'm sure you can appreciate. So that is a long ways away if redevelopment is to take place, but in the interim we want to maximize the use of the site and really generate more profit from a tourism perspective.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Hutchison.
Back to the previous speaker, but maybe Mr. Newman. Anyway, under the slide it was policy planning. There's no need to go there. It says preparation of guidelines that assist staff in managing development approvals while addressing issues raised by members of the public. That sounds very good. Is that going to be made available to the committee?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. I think a good example of that would be the community benefit guidelines that we've been working on. So
sure.
As that work unfolded, there were iterations brought to there were workshops with members of the public. So it's certainly intended to be a very transparent and open process. Similarly would be with the tall building guidelines that Paige is overseeing. I suspect we'll be bringing iterations of that to this committee as well, so that you're sort of able to participate in the development of that work.
Yes, I'd encourage you, because the more we know how staff feels they have to think about things in their legislative structure, the more it'll be easier to understand why you made certain choices, right? So presumably that's part of the reason for doing this. And then I guess we'll argue about the interpretation or something, because that's inevitable, but, or you probably have your own arguments. So, but I still think, what I think is really important here is the process is clearly opaque to the public. Yeah. Things go in, then suddenly, hardly suddenly on the part of staff, but comes out, how did you get there? How did you arrive at this answer? So now, further to the chair, are we going to come back because questions regarding the written?
I was going to.
But we've got like 3 minutes.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that with the concurrence of the committee, maybe we can finish up this particular agenda in about 15 minutes. Now, planning is a technical commitment to 6:30. We sometimes have up to 15 minutes waiting for quorum, but I wouldn't mind, with your concurrence, trying to wrap this up in 15 minutes. I'm looking to a couple of public participants. I saw a thumbs up that would be okay rather than recessing and coming back later. Is everybody comfortable with that? A little comments that I'd like to make as well, but you still have the floor.
Okay, so my understanding about planning is it had to start on time. So I'm not quite sure what happened, what the chair is suggesting. Like, we have a case in front of us, zoomed, especially at planning. You start right at 6:30. And then in 15 minutes, if you mean in 15 minutes we'll come back to this, then I don't see the problem. Just want to clarify, that's all.
Are there any other questions or comments? I will pass the chair to the vice chair if I could, because I'm going to be more long-winded, but not too long. I have a few comments and questions, and I'll kind of do them all at once, and then perhaps they can be addressed. First of all, for people who aren't aware, the preliminary consultation that we allow developers, I think is a really good idea. Developers go totally in confidence, and our planning department maintain that confidence, but they allow, they're able to give input on zoning issues, official plan issues, what kind of, how their development fits within that frame legislation. So I think it's a really good thing. I also appreciate that the one question, and I'm not even sure if this is kosher, that we're able to ask sometimes is, been any interest expressed on this address? And in the past, planners have been able to say yes or no, which is helpful because we all hear rumors about development, and this city is really good at creating dangerous rumors. So it's a nice way to get that information. So I appreciate that. We have been faced on a couple of occasions with having an OMB appeal because of a time frame issue. We have so much after the statutory meeting to come up with some kind of a comprehensive report. And I have to say, developers use that to their advantage. We get an abeyance list every month, and there are some abeyance projects that have been on there for 7, 8, and 10 years. But then sometimes the same developer will turn around, and the minute we miss a deadline, they challenge the process in the OMB. And OMB processes are really expensive to taxpayers. So I guess the question I've asked before, and I think we can deal with that, hopefully, are we too quick in granting somebody a complete recognition of this as a completed application, and then it's complex enough and we don't get response timely fashion from the developer, and then bang, they're appealing to the OMB. I think Paige may have a response to that. So.
Yeah, certainly, and through you, Mr. Chair, that is a challenging situation that we have, and sometimes applicants or developers, and specifically with the legislative changes that we just went through in the past year related to the amendments to the OMB Act and becoming the LPAT, there were some people that were uncomfortable, not fully understanding what the new process would look like, so they did file appeals based on understanding it would be under the old system because there was a grandfathering clause associated with the legislation, and therefore it was a process that was known to them. I would say that's pretty atypical. We've seen some in the last year, but historically speaking, I would say it's not the best strategy. And with the new changes to the Planning Act, there's greater deference to than ever before to the municipality in making its land use decisions. So any time that something is taken away from the municipality to do its due process, that's certainly something that the tribunal looks at, and they want to make sure that municipalities have the greatest voice possible, not just the councillors, but constituents as well, which is why they added some additional resources through that to assist with the appeals process at the local level from a standpoint of having resources available to people that want to file appeals or be involved in appeals that they didn't have before, and free services to the public. I would say from a review standpoint, I would say no, I don't believe that we review our applications too quickly with respect to completeness. I think that through the pre-application process, when we do the consultations, we determine up front what types of studies are required in support of each type of application. So that's the information, as well as some of the standard information that's part of the application that's reviewed by staff. And we do have to do that process right up front based on the planning legislation. But certainly, in terms of the process, there are time lags, sometimes for several years, especially if an applicant is at impasse with city planning staff related to particular matters of technical review. So there is a back and forth where we're providing very technical comments or expectations related to how a development must change before staff feels comfortable making a recommendation. And sometimes that can result in very protracted periods of time, which can take you past the mandatory times and enable an appeal. So from that standpoint, it's not great, but that is the legislative framework for land use planning in Ontario.
And I appreciate that the complexity of applications determines in large part how long they're going to take. I guess the other side of that we're faced with sometimes is applicants for zoning are told they're not in compliance with zoning. So they have the statutory meeting, but they have little or no incentive to, as long as they can continue to rent that property, they have no incentive to then bring it into compliance. And some of those cases go back before I think any of the planners that are now on staff were on staff then. And I'm just wondering, on a go-ahead basis, if we're going to address that. Will we demand, will we apply the zoning bylaw? Will we have a time frame where if the developer doesn't meet and bring their property into compliance, we can do something a little bit more proactive about making them do so?
Yes, and through you, so you and I have had this conversation before, you've asked this question before, it's a very valid question. I would say historically speaking, and this predates certainly the three of us for sure, there are one that's coming forward to planning committee quite soon, that's probably years old, I would say maybe 9, 10, there you go. So I would say historically speaking, the city has taken a much more passive approach to enforcement, period, whether it's zoning enforcement, property standards, that's been more of the way things historically have gone. In the last couple of years, with the changes in my team and our new approach, we do proactive enforcement. We've taken enforcement cases and tripled them in the last couple of years from what we used to do, are out doing that enforcement. And we are turning our minds to that on the planning side as well, certainly with respect to site plan deficiencies and taking a much more aggressive approach to holding people accountable for compliance matters. And you will see that going forward, but we do have some historical matters that we're still resolving right now, but that isn't our approach going forward.
Yeah. And I know I've spoken to you about this too. Sometimes the delay takes so long, I guess I would feel that a new statutory meeting might be in order. And I know you're doing that more frequently, but I'm thinking of the North End Walmart that came, I think, in 2010 or 11. Then the comprehensive report came 6 years later. And nobody on planning committee had even heard the original statutory meeting with public input. So is that something that you foresee that you will require after a certain length of time, a new statutory public meeting?
I think so, and a lot of that is at staff's discretion. There's certain things related to the extent of change that happens between iterations of a project that warrant a new public meeting, and that's spoken about in the Planning Act. The lapse or the period of time, to that in the exact same way, but I would say that our approach as a management team has certainly been on the side of trying to even overstate or overcommit to public engagement beyond what the city's ever done before, adding additional opportunities for consultation, notice requirements beyond what we've ever done before, and certainly where there has been a protracted process, making sure that we are adding stat public meetings to a process, or even if they're non-stat, just to make sure that there's a refresher with the community and certainly the committee members as well, because sometimes this committee are the ones that would have sat through the public meeting, and then it's taken so long that there's actually a new group of councillors. So you have our commitment on that for sure.
And lastly, I really applaud the secondary suite policy where we're trying to come into full compliance with provincial policy statement, because that's, I think, our low-hanging fruit for making more affordable housing available in the city. And so I appreciate that that's something we're doing on an ongoing basis. Just to new members of the committee, we get a lot of pushback on those things. Sorry, I didn't mean to take this much time. We have 7 more minutes. Yes?
Yield to you.
Yeah.
Ms. Agnew, just one more follow-up question about the statutory period. Is it, I can't remember offhand, is it 12 months or 1 year? And is it from what to what?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So are you talking about the amount of time to make the decision? So on applications for a zoning bylaw amendment, it's 150 days from the day we receive a complete application. On applications for official plan amendment and subdivision, it's 210 days from the day we receive the application.
Great. Any further questions or comments? Yes, and we have about 3 minutes, I believe.
This should be short. On the slide that was public participation, and this will be simple, you don't have to go there. The meeting, is it always the statutory meeting? Usually I think it is, but then I have a following question. So.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, we consider the first public meeting to be a statutory public meeting. We also provide statutory public notice for our comprehensive report, so they're also considered to be statutory public meetings under the Planning Act. So if someone were to speak or make representations at the time a comprehensive report is considered, they have appeal rights, just like anyone else who spoke at the first public meeting.
Okay.
And this is a change that we've only made, I think we brought those changes in June, if I remember correctly. So we're actually exceeding what the Planning Act requirements are related to holding public meetings.
Right, and at the time, like I know we held second meetings for, I don't know, Rideau Marina, but So I think you did cover that, but just to be sure, or at the time that a comprehensive report is considered. So that's what was just said. And when people submit at the second public meeting, can they also appeal? There's no, it's perfect. It seems to me they should be able to, but I'm just making sure that I understand what the status of the meetings, whether you have one or three, you know.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the changes that we implemented in June were to clarify that we consider both meetings to be statutory public meetings. Therefore, anyone who speaks at a statutory public meeting has an appeal right under the Planning Act. So if you were to speak at the time that a comprehensive report is considered, an appeal right.
Okay, and that's supported by provincial legislation and all that sort of stuff. I didn't think it wasn't, but I thought I'd check. Okay, thank you.
This report was information only. Normally, public an opportunity to speak for 5 minutes. Because this is now timed out, I'm going to request a motion to adjourn this meeting, and we'll come back to it after our short regular meeting, and if the public have comments to make, we can do that. Pardon me? Okay. We will, I've just been corrected, that's why the clerk is here. We should recess so we can come back to it. And I knew that. But, so motion to recess until the completion of the next. Everybody, pick your mover and seconder. All those in favor? Thank you very much. And the public, you're welcome to make a comment later. So we will move on then. Yep. We'll move on to our regular meeting. And it begins with the public meeting introduction. I will read that information. Notice of collection. Personal information collected as a result of this public hearing and on the forms provided at the back of the room is collected under the authority of the Planning Act and will be used to assist in making a decision on this matter. All names, addresses, opinions, and comments may be collected and may form part of the minutes which will be available to the public. Questions regarding this collection should be forwarded to the Director of Planning, Building, and Licensing Services. The purpose of the public meeting is to present planning applications in a public forum as required by the Planning Act. Following presentations by the applicant, committee members will be afforded an opportunity to ask questions for clarification or further information. The meeting will then be opened up to the public for comments and questions. Interested persons are requested to give their name and address for recording in the minutes. There's also a sign-in sheet for interested members of the public at the back of the room. No decisions are made at public meetings concerning applications unless otherwise noted. The public meeting is held to gather public opinion. Exemption to this rule is outlined in bylaw number 2006 to delegate various planning approvals to staff and adopt certain procedures for the processing of planning applications subject to delegated authority. Council has authorized staff to use discretion in determining if an application can be a combined public meeting comprehensive report to expedite the approval process. We do have a combined public meeting comprehensive report for a zoning bylaw amendment to 930 Woodbine Road. A decision will be made at the regular portion of the Planning Committee meeting tonight. Following council decision notice will be circulated in accordance with the Planning Act. If a person or public body would otherwise have the ability to appeal the decision of the Council of the Corporation of the City of Kingston to the local planning tribunal, appeal tribunal, but the person or public body does not make oral submission at a public meeting or make written submissions to the City of Kingston before the bylaws passed, that person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision. So, believe we all somehow, yeah. Okay. So this is the public meeting, which I'll call to order for 9:30 Woodbine Road. And we do have the information before us. If the applicant or their representative wish to speak to this, that would be great.
Hello, my name is Karen Stevenson, and I'm Executive Director of Limestone Advisory for Child Care Programs, and our main office is located at 930 Woodbine Road. We are celebrating our 30th anniversary this year, so we've been in business providing quality licensed child care. 18 years at this location, specifically with Limestone Nursery School, which is what we're asking for this amendment. We are a not-for-profit charitable organization. We are governed by a board of directors. We have 4 other programs within our. We have Kids Care Network, which is a licensed home child care agency. We have the Kids Place Early Childhood Center, which is licensed for 175 children, and we're located at 1044 Lancaster Drive. It's inside Mother Teresa Catholic School. We also have a before and after school program, which is located in Kingston East inside Holy Name School, Catholic School. So again, the location is at 930 Woodbine Road. The building area is like 556 square meters. It's located in the center of the surrounding properties. We have residential on the south side and residential on the west side, and then we have commercial side, which is Kingston Honda, and then we have also commercial on the north, which is Acura, like another car dealer. Our proposal is we're asking to expand our half-day licensed child care program with Limestone Nursery School, which again, we've been in operation for 18 years with that program, to include an additional 16 full-day spaces, 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. We have a parking lot which consists of 32 parking spaces, and 2 of those are accessible. And both of our we have 2 throughs, and 2 of them are an accessible door, and we also have an accessible washroom. Why do we want this amendment? Previously, the Ontario Early Years Centre had operated in one of these rooms. We no longer are managing the Ontario Early Years Centre, and we wanted to existing services that we do, knowing that there are wait lists for children that are looking for care, and knowing that this is what we do in our wheelhouse. We know what we're doing, we know how to do it. So this is what we wanted to do, was to expand it to add 16 full-day children. This is a very neat program, and the nursery school we also found is kind of like a want program. So it's a half-day program, and it runs every morning. So it's not necessarily something that would be for families who are looking for full-day care every day to go to work. This is more of the, the first child who's been hanging out with quality time with grandma at home and hasn't had an educational setting, and they'd kind of like a little warning before they hit kindergarten when they're in with 20-plus children. So we want to offer both programs because our nursery school program is full right now. So we know we have the clientele for this program. I'm trying to think if there's anything else to add. So again, we want to expand our current licensed childcare programs to meet the needs of our community. Okay.
Thank you very much. I guess this is the time to ask staff if they have any comments regarding distribution and if there's been any concerns expressed.
Through you, Mr. Proper public notice was given in accordance with the Planning Act for this application. So a sign was posted on the property 20 days in advance of the meeting. Owners within 120 meters received a mailout. So there was 43 direct properties which received that mailout, and an ad was placed in the WIG standard. We haven't received any public comments on this application to date.
Thank you very much. Open it up for comments or questions from the committee. Seeing none, I will now open it up to the public. If the public wish to speak, you don't have to.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Frank Dixon, 495 Alfred, Department 2, K7K 4J4. Thank you to Ms. Stevenson for presentation tonight. Looking through the report and hearing what you had to say, this seems to be a plus level of idea. A very good location. You're near an arterial. You're close to express transit. You have the space to carry through your aims, and also looks like everything is ready to go. Don't have any negatives, which is for me unusual, but just with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions or comments from the public, I will adjourn this public meeting, and we'll move on to the business portion of the agenda. So the regular planning committee meeting number 03-2019, I call the meeting to order. Approval of the agenda. Thank you. Again, pick the litter. Everybody raised their hand. So all those in favor of approval of the agenda? And confirmation of minutes from our December 13th. I believe that they were sent to us electronically. Thank you, Councillor Sanik. Thank you, Councillor Kiley. All those in favor? Carried. The business portion of the meeting is open to the public. Oh, I'm sorry, disclosure of pecuniary interest. Any of us in the child care business? Seeing none. None, briefings none. Now on to the business. The portion of the meeting is open to the public. The city has initiated a new process in which members of the public will have the opportunity to speak for up to 5 minutes on comprehensive reports presented before the Planning Committee. Those wishing to provide oral comments at the meeting will be invited to do so. If a person or public body would otherwise have an ability to appeal the decision of the Council of the Corporation of the City of Kingston to the local planning appeal tribunal, but the person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the City of Kingston before the bylaw is passed, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision. So we have the report, comprehensive report in front of us. This is with recommendation. Is there any comments or questions from members of the committee regarding this? Yes, Councillor Kiley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I have in my notes here that this portion of Woodbine Road is recognized as a local road under Schedule 4, and the rationale that was given is that it's low volume, low traffic, but across the road from this particular building is a fire hall. Down the road is a very populated high school. I'm wondering if staff could talk to me, to the committee rather, about the designation of this road.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the designation of the road is actually done in the official plan, so it's not something that's established through this application. within Schedule 4 of our official plan, it actually shows the road classifications. So it's a technical process that we go through, the right-of-way widths, the amount of traffic that moves on them. So at the time that we do an official plan update, we review the road classifications within Schedule 4. So the fact that a road is really just stating what the official plan considers to be the traffic on that road.
Thank you.
Great questions? Seeing none, again, we will open to the public for any additional comments. Seeing none, if we can have a mover and a shaker for the recommendation. Thank you, Councillor Chappell, Councillor Hill. We all got our name in the minutes now. So, any further questions, comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much. So, why don't we complete this portion? We have no further any notices of motion. Seeing none. Other business. I just want to say really quickly, I'm really thankful that staff, and I haven't always said this, are really good at recognizing when something is totally non-contentious and suggesting that we hear the meeting and the comprehensive report on the same time. Before I, in the chair, if there was any public response or questions about it, I always moved a motion for us to defer in order for people to have an opportunity to address the comprehensive plan. Because doing the public plan and the comprehensive plan on the same night, if there's any potential issues around it, I think is problematic. And people say, you know, how could meeting for public input and immediately vote? So I just want to say if anybody feels a need at a future date to request deferral in order for the public to have an opportunity to address the issues, I will support that. So, but staff have gotten really good at sorting those ones out. So, correspondence, we received Mr. Caron. I believe that was regarding the Prison for Women site, and the next meeting of the Planning Committee is scheduled for January 24th at 6:30. Yes, that is next week. And so we have a very short time between the two. 2 weeks. Oh, it is 2 weeks. Sorry. And so that's the date and time of our next meeting. We'll move to adjourn, but let's remember that we're going to rise from the replete the previous one. Yes, Councillor Chappell.
Through you, Mr. Chair, having approved the minutes, we were to discuss the time of the next planning, because we had to, and with that also open up the discussion of whether we have the meetings on Thursdays or Saturdays or Mondays. And so that was supposed to be discussed before.
You're absolutely right, and I missed that. Might have been the changing of the guard of the clerks that was suggested to come back with us. Are people comfortable with me withdrawing my request for adjournment? Yeah.
I'll just mention that due to the statutory notices associated with planning applications, it's not necessarily possible to change the meeting date in a short turnaround time. So we'd have to consult with planning staff to ensure that the time change occurred in a proper as well. And I just want to also mention that the schedule of meetings for 2019 was previously approved by council in December of the previous year. So we would have to consult council if it would be a full reconsideration or not, but it would be best if we tabled this item for this meeting, and if there was a desire, we could discuss it as a proper business item at the next meeting.
I will say that when we changed it from 6 to 6:30, it was done from among this committee requesting that. So it is an administrative issue. I appreciate that. But if I was going to ask, as I did, if staff had kind of discussed it at all and what their preference, if any, was, and then the committee could do that. Clearly, we can't change the next meeting. We could that minor alteration on a go-forward basis, if that's the will of both staff and this committee. So,
through you, Mr. Chair, we had the opportunity to discuss it briefly at the last time that it was raised, and if it were proposed to change the meeting time from 6:30 to 6 p.m., there aren't any significant issues from a staffing perspective with meeting here at 6 p.m. Back to the notice requirements, we've obviously already provided notice of the next planning committee commencing at 6:30 p.m. So we would have enough opportunity to provide proper notice to implement that change if that's what's desired.
Yeah. That only partially answered the question. Like, is there a preference, or would people like to be out of here a half an hour earlier on planning committee nights? I don't want to put you on the spot.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I could certainly speak to my own personal preference. I come here straight from work, so meeting here at 6 p.m. means I get out of here half an hour earlier. So I certainly am, it would be my preference, but I can't speak on behalf of everyone who attends our meetings.
I see people nodding, so I'm going to take that as so. What is the preference of the committee?
One of the things that, since we've already approved the day is not debatable. Yeah. The time, I have no preference whether we started earlier by half an hour. It would be up to anyone on like 6 o'clock, 5:30. It doesn't matter to me personally. What I would look to do is to have recorded in the minutes that prior to setting the agenda for this committee meeting in the subsequent year of 2020, that we discuss moving this day to a different day of the week.
That a taller challenge, and but that's definitely something we can talk to the clerks about on a go-forward basis. The difficulty with that is it's a pretty complex issue trying to get. We know from trying to volunteer for committees, and there's overlapping days for committees and such. So I think somebody was pointing a hand up just here.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, maybe to try to help facilitate things, maybe we could have the clerk's office pulled together as far as other days of the week and how we could schedule that and present it to you rather than, try to figure it out on the floor right now, because there are other committees, so we want to make sure it doesn't obviously conflict with administrative policies, ARC, EITP, and all of these committees, and the clerk's office would have all that information. So we could present to you some options from there. Committee members could decide what works best.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Hill, and then Councillor Sanik.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, I serve objection of moving it from 6:30 to 6. I think that would be more convenient for staff, and the issue really is, are people able to get away from work presentation here, and I think that 6 o'clock is well within that range. On the other issue, I certainly would not be in favor of moving it to a Saturday meeting.
That would definitely cramp your lifestyle. Councillor Sanik.
Chair, I would never support moving it away from Thursday, because besides the weekend, which is definitely not, when tonight was... No, but it has to be Thursday in my perspective, because the documents don't get released publicly until the weekend, and when you have a really complex file, like the Davis, like the Tannery lands, for example, right? Or Creekford subdivision, or Westbrook Meadows, right? Where all the people in the neighborhood want to, be here, a lot of input. They might not have materials until Monday. By the time, it goes through the neighborhood, everything's posted. And then you would not believe the number of emails we can get between Monday and Thursday, especially as the district counselor, if you have something really contentious, like for me, Dawn House, right? Like it takes you all that time until Thursday, and you want to give staff some questions in advance, and even then you're struggling on Wednesday night to try to compile all the questions and get some answers so you can be better prepared on the Thursday night when we come here. Like there's some meetings where this entire room is filled and so's the overflow, like the Tannery lands. That's what happened, and there'd be no way we could have had that meeting any sooner. And so we've also had the discussion over further, like in past years, if we could have the materials, like sooner. Do we always have to have it like released to us on the week before? And like the staff have basically given us the materials as far in advance as they can. And then I don't even know, is it Saturday they get posted, or is it the Monday? I don't remember.
The agenda is posted on the website Friday around.
And so even it's tight when it's something really contentious, like not everything's like tonight when not many people attend.
Through you, Mr. Chair, maybe I can help with that. So if the committee is interested in what the options might be and possibility, we would look as well at the time frame that information gets released. We understand that with Planning Committee, there is no way that we could have, for example, Planning Committee on a Tuesday and release the information to you on a Friday. There's no way you can absorb that kind of information within that short period of time. So what we could do we could look at not only the dates of potential meeting, but also time frame at which we could release the information and look at.
Thank you. Councillor Hutchison.
In addition to that, you have to remember that we just had council, right? And we had this meeting. So council can be 600 pages. And if you have to read another 400 or 700 for planning, you need all the time you can get if you're going to do any kind of job on it at all. So it's usually, council is the first and third, right, usually. And this is the second and fourth, right? So it doesn't get in there. So it's nice to break that up. And I agree with Councillor Sanik. This agenda is like really light, okay? So it's not going to be like that a goodly portion of the time. That's my observation. Even though any number, people complain about delays and all that, but in fact, most of the stuff goes through without a lot of bother. But even with that, you get one difficult application for whatever reasons, or contentious, and there's usually a lot to go through. So,
I just had one quick
question. As for
question.
6:30, yeah. I'm fine with 6:30. I think the clerk's office put forward 6 at one point, and we didn't change it because to make it easier for people with children to get here.
Yeah.
So that seemed like a good reason to me. But it's the only committee that operates like that I can think of.
Yeah. I have a quick question for the clerk. Because we had intended to bring this forward to this meeting, would it be in order for us to move a motion now, or would it be more procedurally appropriate to bring it to our next meeting in 2 weeks' time, which would mean the 6:30 to 6 wouldn't happen until after that next notice of motion for the next. So we might be talking implementation in March, our first planning meeting in March. Would that be the most appropriate way to approach this?
To follow up on Commissioner Hurdle's previous comment about the clerk's office looking at this issue holistically, it might make more sense double check with the folks from planning to see exactly when the 6 p.m. could be implemented. if there's a desire to do so, as written, and then at the next meeting, have a more concrete decision.
Okay. Suggest then that would give planning an opportunity, clerks an opportunity to weigh in on this if they feel a need to. But if we can have a motion, a clear motion draft on our agenda for our next meeting. Yep. And as in the business portion of our next meeting, we can vote on it then. We can take into account any input from clerks or planning. But everybody happy with that timeline? Seeing a lot of nods. I will now call the motion to adjourn. All those in favor? Great. And we rise from the recess and begin just the public consultation process from our previous one. It's been a long day. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for this chance to speak. I'm going to start by praising the effort from staff tonight. Excellent presentation, excellent handout, visuals, slides, all top-notch. Great to see. I have one suggestion for a further slide, and that is that you create one to summarize recent major achievements, such as the Waterfront Master Plan and the official plan and that kind of thing, just in a concise manner. So I now have some detailed suggestions. Very happy to see a firm timeline on the completion of the comprehensive zoning bylaw amalgamation. I know that's been a really tough project, coordinating staff time. It's a massive, tangled area, and it's going to be the last piece of amalgamation, which is now over 20 years ago. So that's great to see. Very happy to see also the priority on the secondary suites topic. Also a tricky one and a lot of work to be done there. We've got a crisis coming in housing, and we have to get at that as best we can. So happy to see that recognize the priority, and also the mayor spoke about that at his first speech to the new council. Now, it seems to me that the planning department is understaffed. This has been commented on before, and I'm wondering if maybe some examination of that could be done, because we have some really big projects coming up in Kingston. We've got the Tannery Lands proposal, we have the former Kingston Penn site, as a couple. So not only are they large in extent, but they're very complex, and that really gets into staff time. So just in terms of coordinating that, I'm wondering if you could examine just that particular, in terms of the size of the planning department staff and maybe how it compares to staffs in similar cities in Ontario. Okay. I've got one suggestion just on the housing side, and I'm wondering if the planning department could present and update regularly a list of major project status and when they could be completed in terms of large apartment buildings, that kind of thing, and how many units they're going to be coming online. Say, for example, we've got some apartment buildings now that are coming online in the next few months. So I think that would be an item of great interest, not only to council, but also the community. Because I think all councillors heard this when they were canvassing. Housing is a really big issue in Kingston. So that's my suggestion on that. And I do have one question as well, and not necessarily, okay, one more item of praise as well, and that goes along with what I said at the top of my statement. The style of your presentations is first rate. And you've also responded to suggestions from the public on how to improve them. So that's really good. And I'm wondering if that could be emulated by other departments within the city. The standard is higher.
Excuse me, 30 seconds.
Yep. It's higher in planning than it is in other department presentations that I've been at. So I would encourage My last point is a complex one. Now, I think what I'm going to do is I'll put it in writing. So I'll end now. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Seeing no further public input on that portion, I will call a request that we adjourn from. Did you have a question or comment? Sorry, go ahead.
Thanks. This is on the report, right? The written report. I'll get it here. Report PC-19-009, right? I just got some questions about it. So I really appreciate this. That's laid out here. It starts off, what is land use planning, and goes on and fairly, probably to the planners, fairly simple language. I'm taking this very seriously, okay? And so it sort of gives you, I don't quite know how to characterize it, but not saying it was sloppy or anything. It's actually very precise and to the point. A one-off thumbnail sketch, that's what I'm looking for. And what I was wondering is if we, it's part of the education of, if we could get an example. Like you can make it up. In fact, making it up might be better, okay? This is what we're looking at. This is what we're looking for, and this is how we're going to argue our case. That's what I want to understand better. Because as I've said to Paige at different times, like, and I said earlier, it's important for us to understand the reasoning of staff, not just these are the things we got, and this constitutes good land use planning. Well, that phrase sounds good, but it's pretty opaque, okay? I have no idea from time to time, what do they actually mean in this case? It says things, we considered these things. Sometimes you go on for pages and pages and pages, which is fine. I understand you have to do that, okay? But in terms of like the innate, right? I asked the question, so why did you pick this number of stories? There was no answer, okay? No answer whatsoever. Just a reiteration of what you had looked at and what you had considered. But that's not an answer to the question because the peer review said a different number, okay? So it's that sort of thing. I'm being more precise than what I'm asking for here, but I'm just using that as an example. And I think it would be very, very useful for the committee to be able to say, oh, here's an example. I see how they're going to look at it and what the order of consideration is. Because when it comes down to this, it really comes down to weighting, right? W-E-I-G-H-T-I-N-G. And how you weight the factors, the balance, and all that. Well, clearly, there are different appreciations for what the balance should be out there. And I find, like, for instance, the whole debate about densification, I'll sum it up, like, all the bylaw in the innate case allowed for densification already. What was by the proponent and some councillors, which was, let's see, 1 point, in the beginning it was 2.4 times what was allowed by the bylaw, okay? Was argued to be densification. But the problem is, the difficulty is, they're both right, okay? The bylaw already's got densification. The request or the application is even more densification. So when you weight it, how does that happen? It's not easy, but if you could just give us like some kind of basic outline of how you would do that and how you would weight it, how you arrive at your conclusion. And it would be a schematic almost, right? It's not like I realize you got other things to do, okay? It would be easier to be able to understand that. Then if we don't agree with you or we do agree with you, we can actually argue closer. I mean, we're not professionals. But closer to the way in which you're reasoning, and then we'll be at least on the same page maybe. So that's my request. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I can, I just want to make sure that I'm clear and I fully understand what Councillor Hutchison is requesting. Planner, and I have to review these reports, and I have to sign these reports. So yes, I ask questions, and I want to make sure that it's simple enough to understand because I do not have the technical background. So the way they're laid out, they will identify every policy area, for example, of the official plan, zoning, that staff have to review in order to finalize it. But the way it's done, you're correct, it's usually many pages long because there's a lot of content. And we do not want to take away from that content and then members of the public or members of council feeling like somehow we haven't been thorough in the assessment. But am I understanding, Councillor Hutchison, that what you're looking for is above and beyond those many pages of detailed comments from staff is to have some kind of table that shows the list of all of these elements, whether it's noise impact, shadowing, all of those things that have to be reviewed, and in a table format, and identify whether or not the information that's bid is satisfactory in terms of a recommend. I'm not sure if that's what you're looking for. That's not what I'm asking for, but that's still good. We can't grade them, so if you're looking for a grading system similar to what we do for RFP, we wouldn't do that for planning, but I'm not sure if you're asking for.
Not, but it's a good idea. I was looking for more of a test case, or an example that you would get probably in planning school. We'll give it to you. This is the problem. This is the application. Assess this. What are you going to take into account? And what kind of reasoning are you using to assess? So we get a better idea of how the assessment is done. We can guess it. You can get a report, and then you can guess, and you have to work backwards. But by that time, you're already reading between the lines, right? And the issues that come up in public are, how the heck did they arrive at that conclusion, right? And if you were a third party not involved, you have to say, well, I guess this is what they did. I'm trying to narrow that gap. It can't be disappeared, because you're the professionals and we're not, right? But am I making myself more clear now? I thought that is also a good idea, okay? But okay.
Councillor Kiley.
Well, I just echo the councillor to my left. That type of checklist, almost a quick glance, would be helpful, because even going through the daycare application, as non-contentious as it was, I had transit, green space, bike path, and I was checking it off as I went along. So if there was a quick glance, and then we could go and look into the details for each one of those sections, that would be very helpful.
I agree. Councillor Hill.
I agree with that too. I just want to be mindful that, we're already asking a lot of staff. Perhaps there could be we don't need to do it for every situation. I mean, tonight would be a good example where we probably didn't need that, right? But for complex situations, that kind of a matrix, I guess, would be quite useful. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further comments? Oh, yes. Did you want to address any of those concerns? I'm sorry, I'm falling asleep at the switch here.
Through you, Mr. Chair, are we referring to the questions by the member of the public? Okay. I'll get started and then Newman can jump in. I wanted to provide some comments in regards to staffing, because there were questions about whether or not we have the right level of staffing. So I want to provide the following. In the last few years, we have added some positions in terms of within the planning division on the project management side as well as planners. What I will say is probably our biggest challenge for staffing is recruitment and retention. So we could have probably another 5 positions. Doesn't mean we would be able to fill them. We are having some challenges in recruitment and retention of planning staff because they're in high demand across the province, and there aren't that many staff that have the skill set that obviously we're looking for, especially as we move up to senior planner positions and even the manager. I know Ms. Agnew commented earlier, but we're back at our second round of recruitment for that position because we couldn't find anyone the first round. So I want to put that forward because the workforce will be discussing with council over the next couple of months. We're talking about planner tonight, but I'm sure all of you are familiar with healthcare sector and challenges there. So I'm not going to go any longer on that, but I just wanted to point out there have been a few positions added, but our biggest challenge is recruitment.
That's why my question earlier was about back, because I don't know if we need additional staff. In my 8 years on council, I don't think we've ever had a full of planning staff. We've always had positions that needed backfilling. So, but it's definitely worth a consideration. So, thank you. Yes.
I'll be very brief. Mr. Dixon asked about tracking of its likelihood of getting to market, so the timing of active applications coming to market. And so we report to this committee annually on what we call our pending and committed. We've sort of renamed it the Residential Housing Supply Review. But that's a snapshot of all applications, where they are geographically in the city and where they are in the approvals process. So although we don't explicitly say this zoning amendment application is between the public meeting and comp report, and therefore you can assume 3 years to see shovels in the ground or occupancy, some assumptions based on where projects are in the approvals pipeline to when they may come to market. The only challenge is the question of developer motivation. So a developer, as Councillor Neal noted, could be sitting on an approved site plan for years and not bring it to market. So as much as we could try to the committee and council some predictability of when things are, I think there's enough gray area to make it a dangerous exercise. So we just give you the numbers in the pipeline.
Yes, Councillor Callahan.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, is there an expiration on the approval?
There is not, through you, Mr. Chair, although it's something that we are talking about. Yeah.
And to add to that, Mr. Chair, that I think we will definitely want to explore through the Mayor's Task Force on Housing, because we understand that there are going to be some, there's going to be some significant pushback in terms of putting expiration date, especially as it relates to servicing capacity. So it's something that we'll have to work through carefully, but I do believe that we need to look at that. We have buildings, multiple buildings, for example. I'm going to name one, Purdy's Mill, for councillors who have been around for a long time. You'll remember that we had 3 buildings approved back in 2014, and we currently only have 1 building built. So those, we would like to see the stock come online earlier, as we have a vacancy rate of 0.6%.
Councillor Hill, then Councillor.
Through you to Commissioner Hurl, does that provision exist in other municipalities?
I do not know, and I do know that we will need some pretty strong legal advice on this one, because we will no doubt get challenged, but that's something that we'll have to look into and review carefully.
Thank you, Councillor Hill. Ask my question.
Clarity's sake, when we do position, and this is what I think of when you speak like that, we have riders in our agreements with the people purchasing the land that says, if you don't develop it within it might differ, but it's usually like a year, then we reserve the right to buy the land. So when you speak like that about approvals, that's the kind of language, not with that threat, but the implication that we're not going to service you, or we're going to put you at the end line or something. And is that the way we would be thinking about this? Because the reason why we do it when there's land acquisition is because we're selling you very valuable land that somebody else may want. And if you don't develop it, then we're not getting anything here. You're just basically speculating, just to explain to the other councillors why that rider is put in there. So that's what I think of when you speak the way you just did.
So
am I on the right line here?
So through you, Mr. Chair, the concept is along the same lines. Obviously, when we deal with purchase and sale agreement, it's our property. We have a lot more control in terms of the conditions we can put into this this agreement than when it's the private sector coming forward. But the concept, yes, I think there's another M too, is when we do commit servicing. Let's say we commit 400 units of servicing capacity. That also takes away from utilities Kingston's ability to service future projects. But what it also does is it forces utilities Kingston to look at expanding their capacity, their servicing capacity, which means more cost to the municipality. And at the same time, we're not collecting the development charges and imposed fees that we're supposed to collect from these projects that have already been approved and are essentially keeping capacity. So we're getting financially, hit on both sides here. And that will be part of some of the discussions we want to have with council over the next few months as you move forward into your strategic planning. So you when you think about all your priorities, you keep those things in mind in the background.
Yeah, and I do recognize you, but just very quickly comment on that. Annually or semi-annually, we get a letter to the editor that talks about how the city of Kingston is so anti-development and we have a housing shortage. The reality is there are developers for thousands of units of housing that could go tomorrow and get a building permit. Like, we're doing our job, but developers are getting approvals and not building. So, Councillor Sanik.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I just want to clarify. I want to make sure I'm not giving the impression that that's all developers getting on approvals. They're that, and a number of them cannot afford to sit on property and do nothing with them. They need to move quickly with the project so they can get the return that financially they need. But we do have some that we see the constant trends there where they get approvals and they very slowly come through with permit applications.
Thank you. Councillor Sanik.
This is a question for Mr. Newman about the zoning bylaw amendment for secondary suites, second residential units. During the election, I heard from a real estate agent that one way we can try to increase our vacancy rate is to approve more units, streamline the process, make it quicker. He even said we should just focus on whatever applications are in the queue right now, concentrate on getting them done. He thinks that would really help. So with the zoning bylaw amendment that might be coming to us being proposed, would that try to streamline the process? I don't even know if we have a backup, if there is a lot of applications right now in the queue, and if you think it could be streamlined. But I just wondered if you think that what you're bringing forward will help that?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, the intention is to establish zone permissions that allow it to happen without having to come to this committee. So the intention is to allow it so that if you can meet all these explicit standards that we're establishing, you come in for a building permit and put a unit in the basement, whatever you need to do. So that's the intention of the permissions, is to allow second units in a zone that already allows for single-family detached, semi-detached homes.
Councillor Chappelle.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Actually, this is leading up to a question I'll probably be having later as well. But with regards to secondary units, is there a way to establish a policy whereby if you are the primary owner of that property, then you would be permitted to apply for a secondary permit or a secondary suite, but only if you own and reside there and the secondary suite is for somebody else? Is there any way to do that?
So through Mr. Chair, just so I'm clear, you're saying that you could only apply for a second unit if you, the owner, also occupied the same lot?
Correct. And the reason I say this is because I can bring you on a nice road trip all through my district where citizens were assuming they were buying in single family, and then very creative real estate agents sold houses with secondary units in them as duplexes for non-residents. So these people who do not live in the Kingston area are renting out property at higher rates. Whereas if you were if you were living in my basement, for example, my rent, my lower income rent, I would be giving you probably a discount because I want to choose someone who's going to be similar to my lifestyle, and they will pay a lesser rent, market rent, than someone who is going to a duplex that's been created in a similar fashion. They'll pay market rates or higher because the person who owns the building, or who owns the building, does not reside in that same building. I would be very interested in knowing how that can be crafted or created or moved so that if you wish to have a secondary unit, you have to be the landowner of that property.
Can I just say, in the 90s, we tried to zone using terms like family, and the Human Rights Tribunal, I support this idea, say you can't zone by type of tenant or type of resident. So I don't know if saying to have a secondary suite, you have to live in the building would be...
For you, I would like the staff.
I appreciate that, but...
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Chair, we can't regulate through zoning the user of land or who may occupy the building versus not. So we don't have the control, at least under the Planning Act, to do that. And I would say we probably don't have the control under any other piece of legislation for that purpose, for the reasons that Councillor Neal has noted as well, human rights related issues. So we don't have the ability to regulate who occupies a site.
I'd just like to add through you, Mr. Chair, one further comment. So exactly what Greg is saying, in a similar way, we wouldn't have the ability to say, you're permitted to build a single detached dwelling here only if the owner lives in it. We have no ability to control owner occupied versus rental in either a full house or whether the apartments are broken up into the basement versus the rest of the dwelling.
Through Mr. Chair, how do you account then for parking spaces? Because what happens is you end up in a situation where you now have a duplex. Woodhaven Drive is a prime example. I mean, you now create a situation where emergency vehicles can't get down the road because rather than the prescribed 1.6 household, you've got 6 there, and it creates all kinds of problems. And I would have a very tough time supporting secondary units if there can be no controls put on them.
So the one thing I'll just mention as it relates to parking, so we are doing a review of parking rates by bedroom. I mentioned earlier about one of the bucket issues being residential density, and a lot of the zone provisions that we have are applied on a per unit basis. It doesn't really work if you have a home that's been converted into, say, a 6-bedroom rental. To think that a 1 space per unit ratio is appropriate. So we're looking at setting a parking standard that may apply on a per bedroom rate to try and address some of those issues that you're pointing to. The rate that we're recommending for second units is 1 space per unit.
Mr. Chair, if I may
Yes.
add on the secondary units. We don't have much of an option. Secondary units, meaning that the province is mandating secondary units. We had conversations with the province throughout the official plan update, the last one, because we wanted to put some criteria around secondary units, 2 of them, servicing capacity and parking. we were not successful, and the province has the ability to override our official plan, as indicated earlier, and this is provincial policy. Like, I wish I could tell you that we have all kinds of flexibility to refuse secondary units, but we don't.
Through Mr. Chair, as a supplemental, Ms. Hurdle, do you have a wish list of the things you'd like to have changed in the provincial policy? And do you have a wish list? Because I'd love to talk, and we'll make that happen.
Councillor Zanuck, and then Councillor.
Thank you. For secondary suites, you don't think that we could make the zoning, like for parking, be 1 per bedroom for the secondary suite too? And I'll just tell you why, because for that same real estate agent, right, what he said for Woodhaven in particular is that we've had so much big time construction, Amherst Island, right, Providence Continuing Care, that companies have come in and they've rented houses for their workers. And Woodhaven is one example. And so if you have 3 bedrooms in the main dwelling and then 3 bedrooms in that 40% secondary suite, you can definitely have 6 cars, because that's 6 different workers working on the job site. And, you know, they're here for a year, or whenever the project's done, then they go up for rent, you know, till a company comes and rents it out for their staff for the next big project. So definitely in one house with 6 bedrooms, you can have 6 cars.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, as Commissioner Hurdle said, so we have been working very closely with the ministry on this, and what you'll see when we bring this forward, I think in March is our target right now, funding about 20 zone provisions to try and regulate second units, whereas the province has really only conveyed support for one, and that is parking. And they have said that they will support a 1 space per unit rate of parking. So we've gotten sort of verbal support for the provisions that we're preparing to present. So I'm optimistic they're not going to force us to change them. But just to give you some context of the conversations that we're having, I will also say that we are trying to provide broader accommodation to make parking more permitted for these units. So specifically, we're saying that you can have tandem parking, so you can have one vehicle behind the other. And we are trying to wrap our heads around providing accommodation for limited front yard parking. So having a vehicle in the garage and a vehicle in the driveway that leads to the garage.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Over here. So we are, as Greg mentioned, doing a review of the parking standards. I think it's important to note that while there may be circumstances where a house is rented and there are 6 cars associated with 6 bedrooms, there likewise may be a true single detached home where there are 6 bedrooms that only require 1 parking space, right? So from a zoning perspective, we certainly regulate the minimum number of parking spaces required, and I don't think it would be fair to apply a requirement to have 6 parking spaces for every single detached dwelling owner, but it certainly doesn't prevent someone from finding the space on their property that complies with the zoning bylaw and provide more than 1 parking space for that dwelling unit. So it is a minimum standard that we're requiring, and property owners certainly have the ability to go above and beyond the minimum standard.
Councillor Kiley, then Councillor Chappelle.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Another area of housing that brings up a lot of these same zoning bylaw issues is tiny homes. I'm wondering if that has been part of the consideration in secondary suites or separately, again, because there are a lot of analogous policy problems and opportunities.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. We have looked at what we're calling coach homes, which are detached units, so they would be detached homes on the same lot as the primary home. And the only limiting factor that we are presenting relates to lot coverage as it relates to the building size. So you still have to meet Ontario building codes, and I think some of my colleagues have done the math, and it translates into something like 18 square meters, so 200 square feet roughly, to be able to get all the requisite building code compliance, building code items while being able to build a quote-unquote dwelling unit. So we're looking, it's just by virtue of the way that we're defining the standards, you'd be able to build a smaller home, provided you meet Ontario Building Code requirements and the provisions that we're putting in place. So we're not precluding it, we're not outright prohibiting it.
So that will be in the report on secondary suites?
That's right.
Excellent.
We're also looking at the tiny home definition through the new zoning bylaw as well, because I think they're a little bit separate from the second units that are defined by the province that will be included in here, because they're actually built on a mobile chassis. They don't truly meet the definition of a structure within a zoning bylaw. So it is something that we're reviewing in the context of the new zone to ensure our new zoning bylaw accommodates for them where it's appropriate and prohibits them where they shouldn't be as well. So.
Yes, Councillor Chappelle.
I'm going to just make an appointment because I got a hold. I'd rather respect your time being here after hours, and I really appreciate the questions you answered for me to date. Thank you.
So, any further questions, comments? I will now ask for motion to adjourn. Seconder, all those in favor? Carried. Thank you very much. That was an interesting conversation. Thank you.